There's a way stories tie themselves to places, layer by layer, like the rings of a tree. And when you cut through to the core, you realize each ring carries its own weight of mysteries. And sometimes, if you're very quiet, you can hear it. Stories seeped into the very bricks and beams of a building, each layer capturing moments of joy, sorrow, hope, and fear. Wilder, Kentucky. It's one of those places where time feels different. In the heart of this town is a spot that many know, but few truly understand. Bobby Mackey's music world. A crossroads of dreams and nightmares. It's 1978. Picture a young, determined Bobby Mackey, his boots scuffing the entrance of a long-abandoned roadhouse. The neon signs, once bright and inviting, are now faded, mere ghosts of their former selves. But as Bobby peers through the dusty windows, he doesn't see decay. He sees a future. A honky-tonk haven echoing with laughter, music, and where stories of the day would be shared over a glass of bourbon. Yet, this wasn't just a youthful dream. This was the culmination of years on the road, nights under the stars, and songs sung in countless towns. It was a dream carved from the rhythms of railroads and the melodies of his guitar. Bobby yearned for something lasting, something real. But as often happens in stories like these, there was something he didn't know. Something the walls remembered, but the people forgot, or chose to overlook. Before the laughter, before the music, there was another sound. The whispers of forgotten tales, of secrets, and of spirits. Stories that might just chill your very soul. You're about to journey into the heart of Wilder, into the echoes of Bobby Mackey's music world. I'm Jeremy Hegg, and this is When Walls Can Talk. Throughout the ages, man has repeated the same earnest saying, more of a question really, or perhaps even a plea. If these walls could talk. But what if they do, and always have? Perhaps their stories, memories, and messages are all around us, if only we would take the moment to listen. On this podcast, we reinvestigate legends and tales of the past, and allow the echoes of their lessons to live on once again, informing us, educating us, and sharing new and unique insight into the inner workings of the paranormal and spiritual world. Will you dare to listen? This is When Walls Can Talk, the podcast. To truly fathom the gravity of Bobby Mackey's decision, one must travel a bit further, to a place not so far from Wilder. Concord, Kentucky, its population, barely a classroom's worth. 19 souls, each with their own stories, forging their paths amidst a silence that only a town of such scale can offer. But Wilder was calling. Why Wilder, you might wonder? Was it simply the remnants of a once lively nightclub, silently waiting for its revival? When faced with the siren song of Nashville, the music city itself, Bobby found clarity. He revealed to the Discovery Channel, quote, "It was either follow the music to Nashville or carve out a space of my own." Wilder beckoned, not with grandeur, but with familiarity and echoes of yesteryears. But every place, no matter how inviting, carries the weight of the past. Before it reverberated with the sounds of boot heels on wooden floors and heartful country tunes, the grounds told a very different tale. A tale of blood. Dating back to 1850, nestled in what was once the heart of Finchtown, stood a slaughterhouse and meatpacking plant, the very mention of which stirs something primal within. Blood ran freely there, and not just of animals brought for slaughter. Whispers, handed down from one generation to the next, spoke of shadows in the corners, eerie chants in the dead of night, and occult gatherings. At the heart of these chilling stories, a well, a chilling reservoir crafted for the very essence of life: blood. Our tale takes a tragic turn. We've danced around the edges of legends and memories, but now we find ourselves faced with the undeniable reality of human cruelty. The legends surrounding that haunting well didn't just end with hushed whispers. It became the backdrop of a chilling real-life crime: the murder of young Pearl Bryan in 1896. Picture this: Pearl, a young lady of 22 years old, radiant and full of life, hailing from Indiana. One fateful day in January of 1896, she received a telegram. The message was from family friends, beckoning her to visit them in Indianapolis. With youth's inherent thrill for adventure, Pearl decided to embark on the journey, anticipating friendly faces and warm conversations. But what awaited was a fate no one could have foreseen. Mere days after her departure, a discovery was made. Pearl's lifeless, decapitated body lay in a vast field, its unsettling proximity to Fort St. Thomas and, more eerily, to the now abandoned slaughterhouse. The autopsy painted a more horrifying picture. Pearl, the coroner revealed, had been under the influence of cocaine in her final moments. And as heart-wrenching as it is to utter these words, the young woman would have been conscious during the initial moments of her decapitation. The year, 1896, saw investigators piecing together this grim puzzle. They discovered that on the eve of January 31st, Pearl was last seen in the company of two men, Scott Jackson and Alonzo Walling. Witnesses recollected seeing the trio in a cab leaving Cincinnati, ominously headed in the direction of Fort Thomas. A dark cloud of suspicion hung heavily over Jackson and Walling, and detectives, with their instincts sharpened by years of experience, sensed that they were onto something when tracing the footprints of this heinous act. When the cuffs clicked around Scott Jackson's wrists, he wasn't silent. He whispered secrets of a hidden romance with Pearl, one that bore the weight of an unplanned pregnancy. Now, before we dive deeper, a word of caution. The waters we are about to wade into are murky and heavy with pain. A trigger warning for discussions around pregnancy loss and miscarriage. Jackson was the son of a transatlantic sea captain and had traveled extensively by the time he was a teenager. When his father died, he moved with his mother to Jersey City, New Jersey, and took a job at the Pennsylvania Railroad Company. His boss was charged with embezzling several $1,000s, and although Jackson was never charged with anything, he lost his job. His mother later moved to Greencastle, Indiana. While visiting his mother in 1893, Jackson met Pearl Bryan. She was the daughter of a well-to-do farmer who lived near Greencastle. She was described as a Sunday school and church worker, sprightly and vivacious, and a social favorite in her home. She had bright blue eyes, blonde hair that shaded to auburn, a pretty face, the almost flawless complexion of an unspoiled country girl. Jackson and Pearl were introduced by her second cousin, Will Woods, and they became friends, meeting whenever Jackson visited Greencastle. The relationship changed in the summer of 1895, and after Jackson left for Cincinnati, Pearl made a discovery. She was pregnant. She confided in her second cousin Woods, who wrote to Jackson. Jackson wrote back and told him to tell the girl to come to Cincinnati. She arrived by train at Cincinnati's Grand Central Station on Tuesday night, January 28, 1896. Jackson, confronted with the reality of impending fatherhood, was far from elated. He presented Pearl with a choice, or rather a demand. He urged her to drink a concoction, a blend of ergot, a fungus, and rye. Some of you might recognize this mix. It's been rumored to be at the heart of the hysteria during the Salem witch trials. But Pearl, perhaps with a fire in her eyes and steel in her spine, rebuffed him. Time and time again, "No," she would assert. "This is not the path I choose." But Jackson's insistence bordered on obsession. "Drink this," he'd press. But Pearl was unyielding. In a final act of desperation, Jackson sent her to Cincinnati. the intention clear: an abortion. But Pearl, whether she journeyed there or not, whether she stood at the threshold of that clinic or not, didn't go through with it. January 31st. The darkened shroud of night envelops the town. Pearl, unsuspecting, joins Scott and Alonzo. Their intentions? Sinister. A clandestine potion laced with cocaine is slipped in her drink. An atrocious attempt, hoping to end the life growing inside her. The cruelty, the sheer depravity of it is overwhelming. Their hasty plan did not deliver the results they sought. Their patience, non-existent. So they resolved to a macabre act, thinking it would cloak their deeds in anonymity. Decapitation. It's difficult to fathom, isn't it? The very same Scott who once held Pearl close, now ensnared in this wicked plot. Their love, if it ever truly was, overshadowed by darkness. 2 days later, on a cold, foggy morning, John Hewing was cutting across a field at the corner of Highland Avenue and Alexandria Pike in Fort Thomas. The property belonged to Colonel John Locke, Hewing's employer. As he walked, he spotted a woman lying on the ground. "I didn't know if she was drunk or dead," Hewing said later. "Lots of women from the town used to come out there with the soldiers from the post. It was a lonely spot, and they often used it for a trysting place. We had lots of women out there who were drunk." He told his employer about the woman, and a nearby deputy sheriff was asked to look into it. The deputy sheriff and some others, including Coroner Bob Tingley, went to the spot and found indications of a struggle and a pool of blood at the woman's feet. When Tingley turned over the body, he pulled her dress down, revealing that the woman's head had been cut off. When interrogated, the tales of where the perpetrators disposed of her head diverged. One of them spoke of a reservoir on the journey back to Cincinnati, the other a sandbar near Dayton. Officials searched the surrounding area for the head. Bloodhounds were brought out, and they trailed the scent from the scene to the Covington Reservoir in Fort Thomas. The reservoir was drained, but her head was not found. Regardless, the grim truth remained. Pearl's head was never to be found. Jackson's arrest came quickly after the police discovered Wood's letter, revealing Bryan's pregnancy. The subsequent day, Walling was taken into custody following Jackson's accusations against him, a charge Walling returned towards Jackson. Their initial acquaintance was in dental school in Indiana, but their bond strengthened in Cincinnati. Police learned from Walling that Jackson first proposed an abortion for Miss Bryan. However, later plans shifted towards poisoning her to simulate a suicide. By February 13th, both men faced murder charges, and the police fervently sought a confession about the whereabouts of Bryan's severed head. Fred Bryan, Pearl's brother, transported her body from the Newport morgue to Cincinnati's John P. Epley mortuary. There, on February 8th, the tragic sight of Bryan in her graduation dress confronted Jackson and Walling. Pearl's grieving sister pleaded for information about the head's location, yet their stoic faces yielded no answers. Ultimately, Pearl was laid to rest in Greencastle, Indiana's Fort Hill Cemetery. To this day, visitors lay Lincoln pennies on her tombstone, symbolizing hope for her wholeness in the afterlife. Jackson's trial, spanning from April 21st to May 14th, saw medical professionals asserting the likelihood of Bryan being alive during the decapitation. Although Bryan maintained his innocence, his defense argued otherwise, suggesting her death preceded the beheading. Both Jackson and Walling were found guilty, with Jackson's trial ending on May 14th and Walling's concluding on June 18th. Their incarceration was under heavy guard due to lynching fears from the angered community. In fact, during an escape from the jail, they chose to stay put. Their imprisonment lasted until May 20th, 1897. On the day of the execution, a crowd assembled, observing the duo's braven defiance. Their impending doom was scheduled for 9 a.m. However, a twist occurred minutes before the hour. Jackson claimed Walling's innocence. This revelation reached Governor William O'Bradley, who demanded more clarity. Despite the pause, Jackson later retracted, stating he had no more to share. By 11:32 a.m., the grim procession to the gallows began. As the executions unfolded, Jackson's poise was evident, contrasting with Walling's visible distress. When asked for final words, Jackson's declaration of innocence was poignant, as Walling hoped for a saving revelation. Walling's final plea emphasized his claimed innocence and invoked divine witness. March 20th, 1897. The trapdoors fell, and both met their fateful end on the gallows for their crimes. Justice, in one form, served. But whispers of the case, the tales, and the mysteries, they reverberated through time. And as the years rolled on, the ghosts of Scott, Alonzo, and especially Pearl entwined themselves with the legends of that forsaken slaughterhouse, their legacies forever haunting those grounds. Let's wind back the clock for a moment. There's this chilling legend that surrounds Pearl's story. Some whispered claims pointed to a dark underbelly, that the killers were involved in Satanism, and that Pearl's tragic end was a result of a ritualistic sacrifice. Now here's where it gets a little deeper, quite literally. Some speculate that the reason nobody ever found Pearl's head was because it was discarded into a well. Not just any well, but one that belonged to the old slaughterhouse. All that after this. Fast forward to the 1920s. The community, grappling with the weight of this eerie lore, decided something had to be done. If this slaughterhouse was truly the scene of such dark events, it needed to be torn down. And while the slaughterhouse and its tales faded, the world moved on, and so did the town's preoccupations. The Roaring Twenties. Jazz, flapper dresses, prohibition, and yes, the allure of gambling. It's almost like Gatsby come to life, right? Old sport, he'd probably chuckle if he heard this story. Then, in 1933, as Prohibition's curtains were drawing to a close, a man named Ernest Buck Brady saw an opportunity. He transformed the old roadhouse, giving it a new lease on life as a restaurant and casino. And the name he chose? The Primrose. In what felt like an instant, the Primrose was the place to be. But with success comes attention, and in this case, not all of it was good. The mob, ever watchful, saw a gold mine in the Primrose's roaring trade, and soon, despite Buck Brady's dreams and efforts, they muscled their way in, taking over his enterprise. In the midst of all this, enters Frank Andrews, or as many in the circle affectionately dubbed him, Screw. Why they called him that? Well, some things are better left to the imagination. Under Frank's steerage, the club underwent another transformation, rebranding itself as the sultry-sounding Latin Quarter. By the time the 1950s rolled around, it wasn't just any club. It wasn't just popular, it was an institution. And under the table, an illegal gambling den that thrived for a staggering 11 years. Now, I'm not an expert on the lifespan of illicit ventures, but over a decade? That's no fleeting moment in the sun. That's longevity. That's like seeing your business venture grow through its tumultuous teenage years. But as the 60s dawned, there was a palpable shift in the air. The townsfolk, once turning a blind eye, now began to murmur. The veil of the Latin Quarter's underground dealings was lifting, and people wanted law enforcement to act. By 1961, the club's doors were shut by those very forces. Again, time passed, and then in the 1970s, echoing with the sounds of electric guitars and pounding drums, it rose from the ashes as a hard rock cafe. Now, not your typical touristy hard rock. This one was true to its name, drawing a crowd that was, let's say, a little edgier, a little rough around the edges. A vibe that left the locals more than just a tad uneasy. The Cincinnati Enquirer went on to say that this hard rock catered to a very particular audience, one that truly lived and breathed the essence of hard rock. The history of this property, it's a puzzle. Regardless of its label, be it a roadhouse, the Primrose, the Latin Quarter, or the Hard Rock, it seemed to have this magnetic pull for trouble, like a bad penny that just keeps showing up. It was, in a way, its defining characteristic. One might naturally assume that its days under the mob's thumb would be its most tumultuous, but you'd be surprised. It was, paradoxically, its tenure as the Hard Rock that was seeped in the most violence. Not something one would guess at first blush. It's a funny thing about history, especially criminal history. It often relies on who's documenting it, and for this chapter, it was the diligent Wilder police. They weren't jotting down anecdotes, but rather full-blown crime reports. Time and time again, they found themselves being summoned to this very location. Disturbances, altercations, and even more grievous incidents were unfolding, predominantly in the parking lot. Wilder Police Chief Robert Schneidler once remarked, "We have had an awful lot of trouble down there." It was worth noting by the time the Hard Rock shuttered its doors in '77, the parking lot had been painted with the aftermath of several tragic incidents. Only weeks before its closure, a man's life was cruelly snuffed out by a shotgun blast, and not long before that, another unfortunate soul met a similar fate. There's a morose rhythm to this history. A parking lot that served as an eerie stage for late-night altercations, and where post-bar energies often took a dark turn. It seemed to draw in a crowd that wasn't just there for the music. But this is all hindsight. When Bobby looked at this property in 1978, he wasn't weighed down by its gruesome past. For him, it was a canvas for dreams, for his own vision, a place that would soon become the iconic Bobby Mackey's Music World. It's curious, isn't it? The subtle whisper of intuition, of a bad feeling. While Bobby seemed almost blind to any negative vibes emanating from the building, Janet, Bobby's wife, was immediately tuned in. The moment she stepped out of the car, the nightclub's facade seemed to shift, as if it whispered a secret. She saw a shadow, a movement, a door closing. Was there someone inside? What's your first instinct when you witness something like this? Tell someone. And that's exactly what Janet did. She turns to Bobby, her voice perhaps edged with anxiety, and says, "Bobby, I think there's someone inside." But for Bobby, consumed perhaps by excitement or just sheer disbelief, it was an easy thing to brush off. Why worry? It's daylight, after all. And yet, as Janet stepped inside, there's that undeniable energy, like a hum in the air. A strange, unsettling charge. The interior gave off an abandoned aura, dimly lit, a stillness in the air, untouched tables, relics of the past adorning the walls. It felt like a snapshot of a moment abruptly left behind. But what stood out to Janet wasn't just the eerie semblance of life paused, but a palpable presence. She once shared, "It felt like someone was in there, but it was just Bobby and me." She couldn't shake the feeling, and that's when she heard it. The hushed murmur of an argument, the distinct tones of a man and woman in disagreement. And as she approached the kitchen where it seemed to come from, hoping for a rational explanation, she was met with nothing. Just an empty room. Now, in tales of the paranormal, echoes of conversations from the past are not uncommon. It's that strange manifestation of energy, replaying moments like a broken record. And for Janet, this experience was an early introduction to the club's layered and complex history, a prelude to the mysteries that lay ahead. Here's the thing about intuition. It's a silent voice, often overwhelmed by the noise of ambition, of dreams. As Janet stood there, every fiber of her being was screaming for an escape, a way out from that dimly lit, unsettling building. She would later confess, all I wanted was to get out of there. But here's where things get intriguing. While Janet was anchored in her alarm, Bobby was floating in a bubble of enthusiasm. It was as if they were in two parallel universes, one filled with dread, and the other with dreams of what could be. I mean, picture it. Bobby wandering around, humming a tune, planning his next big venture, his music world. And Janet, just hoping to leave, her eyes locked on the exit. It's almost cinematic. The contrast between the two couldn't have been starker. And yet, isn't that the beauty and complexity of human relationships? Janet knew she had two choices. Burst his bubble and try to pull him back to her reality, or accept that this dreamy building, in spite of its chilling energy, had already cast its spell on Bobby, a spell that she, with all her might, couldn't break. A few weeks later, the deed was done. They owned the building, located rather ominously at 44 Licking Pike. Quite the name, isn't it? Every time I say it, there's this niggling doubt. Is that really the name? But indeed it is. The tale of Licking Pike had only just begun. Here's where the plot thickens. Just days after putting pen to paper, as the Mackeys dusted off memories and remnants from the club's previous life, an unfamiliar face materialized at the doorway. It was one of those moments. Janet, understandably on edge after her previous experience, thought, is this real? Or another one of those, visions. Bobby stepped forward to get a clearer view. As it turns out, it was very much a man of flesh and blood. A guy in his 20s, average height, and dressed in rather nondescript manner. In fact, he seemed, ordinary. But ordinary things often have the most extraordinary tales, don't they? He broke the ice with a simple introduction. Hey, I'm Carl. Carl Lawson was his name. He spun a tale of working at the Hard Rock before its untimely demise, and finding himself without employment since. There was this genuine, almost desperate offer. Hey, I know every nook and cranny of this place. Need a hand? I'm right there. Carl seemed eager to be useful. But then, in an awkward twist, he blurted out, I saw a guy get murdered here once. Talk about oversharing, right? I mean, that's not exactly the first thing you'd expect someone to share during an introduction. It was like, hello, welcome to your new building. By the way, I witnessed a homicide right here. Cheers. Janet, who was already pregnant and likely battling a mix of hormones and intuition, wasn't quite sold on Carl. But Bobby, ever the pragmatist, saw potential. A helping hand, someone with intimate knowledge of the place, seemed like a win-win. So, Carl was in, diving headfirst into his new role with a zest that made one thing clear. He was genuinely happy to be back. But here's the thing about Carl. His devotion to the place was almost palpable. At first glance, you'd think, is this guy too attached? But then there's that age-old saying, if you're passionate about what you do, does it even count as work? Carl seemed to be the embodiment of that sentiment. This wasn't just a job to him. It was a calling. You might even say the place had a soft spot for Carl. But let's not get too carried away with sentimentality because, as you'll see, this is no ordinary love story. Now, I know where this tale is headed, so I might be a little biased. But for those of you in the dark, buckle the fuck up. Carl had a peculiar assurance about him. He casually mentioned to Janet one day, the ghosts here? They're pals of mine. Sweet, right? Almost endearing. You'd think, that's just Carl being Carl. But as days turned into nights and nights back into days, Janet's skepticism began to waver. Was Carl's sentiment just a quirky comment or a precursor to events yet unknown? With each passing day, the ambience of the place grew more curious, and Janet, unbeknownst to her, was just at the beginning of this eerie journey. Days had passed since Janet's initial haunting experience, but there's something about the club that refused to let go. While doing her usual cleaning in the main room, she hears it again. The unmistakable sound of arguing voices. Familiar voices. The the same chilling echoes she had encountered when she first stepped into Bobby Mackey's with her husband that first day. She walks cautiously to the kitchen, empty yet again, but the silence is shattered by an eerie sound emanating from the sink. What Janet finds there is more horrifying than any ghostly voice. A sink, filling with what seems to be blood. Terrified, she tries to move away, but a forceful hand pushes her back, pulling her towards the depths of the sink, a force that grows stronger the more that she resists. And just when it seems the force will prevail, Carl bursts in, and just like that, the grip is gone. Carl's timely entrance might have saved Janet's life, but it raises a question. If these ghosts are Carl's so-called friends, why are they turning on Janet? Is there something about their past that she doesn't know? Janet and Carl confront Bobby. The sink, the voices, the menacing presence, it's too much. But Bobby remains dismissive. Was it denial, or did he know something more than he let on? I don't believe in ghosts. There's got to be another explanation. What would it take for Bobby to believe? Only time would tell. Janet and Carl reach a point of agree to disagree with Bobby. Their message, whether or not you believe, there's something or someone else with us in this club. A few nights post Janet's chilling experience, another piece of the puzzle emerges. Larry Hornsby, not a superstitious man by any means, but a diligent police officer, was doing his nightly rounds. The neon sign of Bobby Mackey's caught his eye, but more so did a fleeting silhouette, almost like a ghost of a presence in an otherwise closed club. Imagine the chills down Hornsby's spine, thinking, perhaps this isn't just another night. He's trained for break-ins, for human threats, but not whatever this is. Backup was called, and as two badges approached the silent building, all they had was their training in perhaps skepticism? Now, inside, the darkness of the club felt almost thick, like a curtain. Hornsby, perhaps hoping to save some face, started to doubt himself. But that doubt, it was pretty short-lived. The distant muffled sounds from the backstage area confirmed it. Something was there, or someone. But the real question, was this an intruder from our world, or from another? He distinctly heard the sounds of a man, a woman, and the faint notes of a radio. Yet when they approached the source of the noises, they were met with an eerie emptiness. And then, as if to deepen the mystery, the unmistakable sound of the front door slamming echoed through the quiet club. Hornsby mused to himself. Did someone slip by us? Or was it something else? Fast forward a few nights, and Hornsby was back at the scene, this time for a more somber reason, an accident. By the time they reached the driver, he had tragically passed, and in an attempt to maintain some dignity amidst the tragedy, Hornsby looked for something to cover the body. It was then that a young woman, presumably a waitress from the club, offered him a tablecloth. Grateful, Hornsby planned to thank her, but when he entered the club to try and find her, the doors were locked. The place appeared untouched for hours, and the helpful waitress? Nowhere in sight. Spring turned to summer, 1978. As the frost of winter melted away, giving rise to blooming aspirations, Bobby and Janet were deeply engrossed in the massive renovation. Their dream was to breathe life back into this age-old club. However, on a seemingly ordinary night of July 8th, an unexpected inferno threatened to engulf not just the building, but the very dreams of Bobby and Janet. Edward Sandbaugh, the fire chief at the time, reported the source of the fire as unexplained. The flames were fierce, originating from one of the club's most ancient corners, and while firefighters managed to tame the blaze before it caused irrevocable damage, questions lingered. What caused it? And why that specific part of the building? Though the monetary damages amounted to about $2,000, the real cost was in time and dreams deferred. The grand opening of the club that Bobby and Janet had been eagerly anticipating would have to wait. There's a tangible sense of loss when things like this happen. It's not just about the money, but the momentum, the anticipation. For Bobby and Janet, It was yet another reminder that Mackey's was no ordinary place. As the summer days lengthened and the anticipation of the grand opening of Bobby Mackey's Music World grew, there seemed to be a brief respite from the uncanny occurrences. Things were aligning for their slated September reveal. Yet, despite the uplifted ambience, Janet and Carl couldn't shake the eerie disturbances echoing through the club's walls. It was a relief that the previous violent spectacles, especially the harrowing incident with Janet in the kitchen, had paused. One might even dare to say that there was a fleeting moment of peace, or at least as peaceful as it could get at Mackey's. But as the summer winds began to cool in late August, the chill wasn't the only thing in the air. Janet, now in her 6th month of pregnancy, found herself in yet another terrifying predicament. Inside the quiet office on the 2nd floor, an unsettling sensation gripped her, a feeling of not being truly alone. And as she navigated her way out of the office, that unease manifested into something palpable. An unseen force, masculine and menacing, clasped onto her arm. The sheer terror momentarily paralyzed her, but the grip soon loosened. However, relief was short-lived. A forceful shove from the unseen entity sent her reeling, and then another, more aggressive push sent her hurtling down an entire flight of stairs. The physical pain of the fall paled in comparison to the emotional torment. The weight of not just her own safety, but that of her unborn child bore down upon her. In the dimness, as she lay there, she believed she glimpsed a shadowed figure, watching silently from above. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. Janet would later reflect on that traumatic moment, her voice quivering. The terror wasn't just for me. It was the thought that I might lose my unborn child. A whirlwind of emotions consumed me. Anger, fear, confusion. After such a harrowing experience, especially when expecting, it's a gut-wrenching ordeal. Taking a tumble during pregnancy is enough to send shockwaves of anxiety through anyone. So, without hesitation, Bobby and Janet made a beeline for the emergency room. In a turn of events no one could have predicted, Janet had to be induced. At merely 6 months, the result was a premature baby girl, weighing in at just under 2 pounds. It's a weight that's nearly unfathomable. The fragility, the vulnerability. Against all odds, though, this little warrior persevered. She faced weeks within the sterile walls of the NICU, but ultimately emerged resilient, ready to go home with her relieved parents. Yet the traumatic memories lingered. Janet, while grateful for the life of her child, was resolved. Bobby Mackey's Music World had seen her last footprint. She wouldn't return. The shadowy tendrils of the past have a way of interlocking with the present, don't they? The eerie parallels between Janet's ordeal and Pearl's miscarriage attempt are hard to dismiss. Coincidence? Intention? As we journey further, those intuitions, those vibes you're getting, they'll prove pivotal. In the aftermath of Janet's unsettling fall, a pivotal conversation began to brew. Carl, you see, found himself once more attempting to pierce through Bobby's veneer of skepticism. Picture Carl, cautiously approaching. "Hey Bobby, remember when I mentioned the haunting vibes? Given what happened to Janet, maybe it's time we sought out someone versed in the paranormal." But Janet's absence loomed over the discussions, a constant reminder of the stakes. Yet in a twist, Bobby was still unwavering. Ghosts? Here? Impossible. His concerns lay elsewhere. One part of him likely dreaded whispers about his establishment, the potential harm to its reputation. But then there's this irony. Some people actually flock to haunted locations. Ghost tours, haunted hotels, they've become a phenomenon in and of themselves. And then here's the other thing. Bobby hadn't personally encountered the inexplicable, the eerie, the uncanny. In his eyes, seeing was believing, and so far, he hadn't seen. Amidst these spectral debates, the club faced another obstacle, and it was a very tangible one. A malfunctioning sprinkler system, brought to glaring attention post the fire incident. This posed a real and present danger, pushing the club's inauguration to the back burner. Bobby, eager to finally open his establishment's doors, committed to rectifying it. His commitments seemingly bore fruit, and as the autumn leaves began to fall, the promise of an opening night on October 27th, 1978 finally beckoned. There was a buzz in the air as Bobby Mackey's music world, a realm of allure and opulence, opened its doors. The spotlight shone on performers like Jack Reno and, quite notably, Bobby himself, a man with undeniable talent. Yet, as with many stories, the high was fleeting. December's cold breeze carried with it an unexpected chill for Bobby. A closure order penned by the Kentucky Fire Marshal. The culprit, that persistently troublesome sprinkler system. Promises had been made, assurances given, but the club wasn't up to code. This wasn't a mere slap on the wrist. Beyond the sprinklers, Bobby faced a daunting task, a thorough sweep of the whole property for any other electrical issues. One can imagine him, pacing, tallying up costs, the weight of investments he'd already poured in, pressing on him. For a moment, doubt crept in. The vision of starting anew loomed ominously. In a candid chat with the Cincinnati Enquirer, Bobby hinted at a possible relocation. Yet beneath his words lay an undeniable determination. His dedication to the club was unwavering. The hurdles were temporary. Much like its resilient owner, the club sprang back into action, nestled in its original location. His club was a hit, particularly on the weekends, with praise cascading in from reviews, yet a shadow of the past still lingered. Those eerie encounters, they weren't confined to the past. More worryingly, the supernatural had shifted its attention to the club's patrons. As the narrative goes, Bobby was desperate to maintain a polished image, one free from whispers of hauntings. Carl, however, wasn't one to hold his tongue. He felt it a duty, or perhaps a tantalizing opportunity, to regale anyone within earshot about the resident phantoms. Now enter Mike Gruber, a club regular, with the audacity to mock Carl about his spectral acquaintances, all while aboard a mechanical bull. The scene was almost cinematic. Mike, mid-jeer, suddenly faced an unexpected, accelerating menace beneath him. The mechanical beast, now seemingly possessed. The rhythmic hum of machinery reaches a crescendo, and as Mike yells for intervention, Carl stands helpless. Because this isn't just machinery gone awry. It seemed like there was an otherworldly hand at play. But the aura of Bobby Mackey's wasn't just reserved for the regulars or its owners. The building's energy extended to those merely passing through for work. I mean, I'd probably avoid it too, but enter Johnny France, a carpenter on a routine assignment, let alone in the expanse of the club's main area. It's here, in this seemingly benign setting, that Johnny claims he witnessed an unsettling scene. An entire row of chairs, falling one by one, tumbling as if nudged by an unseen force. Almost like dominoes? But these weren't dominoes, they were chairs. You could say it's a coincidence or dismiss it as mere happenstance, especially since Carl had noted a similar event just weeks prior. But for many, this just added another layer to the growing tapestry of tales surrounding the establishment. And while for most, these stories were just that, stories, amusements to share over a drink, but Carl's intrigue only deepened. And you can't blame him, right? Stumbling across the unexpected can be exhilarating, and that's exactly what happened one day in the club's basement. Amidst the musty air and dim light, a seemingly insignificant loose floorboard caught his attention. Lifting it, he revealed a hidden cache containing a diary. We all have those secret fantasies, right? The ones that play out in our minds on long car rides or while we're daydreaming. Finding a hidden artifact, perhaps a treasure, or in this case, a diary beneath floorboards. It's the stuff of movies, isn't it? And I know, it sounds almost ridiculous, almost too good to be true. The thrill of uncovering a bygone era's intimate secrets. Who wouldn't want that? I mean, while ethics may make us ponder the morality of such a discovery, let's be real. The temptation is, well, palpable. But back to Carl and his cinematic moment of discovery. The diary, as it turns out, wasn't just any diary. It belonged to Johanna. And if you're a fan of Bobby Mackey's music, which, sidebar, is surprisingly more folk than country, you might recognize the name, Johanna. It's the melancholic twang of a love ballad Bobby penned. What's inside this diary? Pages detailing the life of a showgirl. an artist of the stage, a beacon of a bygone era. Johanna's life reads like a novel. As Carl delved deeper into the pages, her love story unfolded. A club musician, no less. How quintessentially poetic, right? Yet, like so many romances, this one bore the burden of disapproval, particularly from Johanna's father. Classic case of forbidden love. It's almost Shakespearean if you think about it. Star-crossed lovers in a honky-tonk setting. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many stories remain buried under floorboards, waiting for their moments to resurface? There's a certain way life has of taking twists and turns that make you pause, reread a paragraph, and question if what you've read could possibly be real. It's those oddities, the bits of truth more peculiar than fiction, that make the narratives we traverse so riveting. But imagine being told you cannot have those feelings. And not just that, imagine being told, and you better not act on them either. This kind of stuff pushes boundaries. The sort of thing that adds flavor of forbidden to any tale. And as we all know, what's forbidden often becomes all the more alluring. And that's where Johanna finds herself. Despite the oppressive weight of her father's disapproval, she continued this clandestine relationship. It's almost cinematic. The musician, the passionate dancer, and the oppressive father. But then, just like that, her lover vanishes. It's a chilling notion, especially when the person who vowed harm is so close to home. Immediately, she suspected her father, and I can't say I wouldn't either. So the ending? It's nothing short of tragic. She poisoned her dad, and then took her own life. There's an otherworldly melancholy in Johanna's final act. Her pledge to remain, forever waiting, hoping for a reunion that, in the physical realm at least, would never happen. I mean, isn't that the very essence of a haunting? A tale so gripping, it sticks with you. And that diary, the very artifact holding this story, it's the sort of artifact most of us, if we're being honest, would be captivated by. Because stories like this, as haunting as they are, tap into the deepest facets of our own curiosities.
Way back in the 30s, in the little town of Wilder, lived an old man and his lovely little daughter. They ran gambling for a living, it was the best place around. All the men would come and lay their money down. Her daddy was a jealous man, but Johanna fell in love. He kept saying the man dealt a bad hand. So deep in the night, when all the world is quiet, someone came and took her lover's life. Johanna, Johanna, where are you now? Could it be you're still here somehow? Johanna, Johanna, where are you now? Is it true you're still here somehow?
Sometimes, stories evolve in ways that defy our expectations, and that's what we're dealing with here. An evolution of character, of perception, in the most unexpected setting. Carl, you see, began to see another side of Johanna. In the midst of the spectral mystery, where most of us might feel unease, he felt connection. And while that's a rare sentiment, it's compelling to think about the relationships we form, even with those beyond our plane. And Johanna? By Carl's account, she wasn't your everyday phantom. Instead, she emerged as a friend, confident, someone he could rely on. It's almost heartwarming in a haunting kind of way.
Johanna, Johanna, are you really here? Looking for your lover after all these years. Johanna, Johanna, are you really here? Has your lover returned after all these years?
However, like any good mystery, this story had its curveballs. Re-enter Janet. The juxtaposition of her experience versus Carl's understanding of Johanna creates a fascinating tension. She thought, what if Johanna wasn't as benign as Carl believed? What if there was a layer of jealousy or resentment driving her actions? It's pure speculation, of course, as much of this story is, but Carl had a theory. A theory about Johanna being pregnant and resented Janet for hers. Well, I suppose this just adds another layer, another possible motivation, another question mark. In these stories, definitive answers are often elusive, but as is often the case, it's not the answers, but the journey of speculation and discovery that keep us captivated. The intricacies of tales like these often come with their own layers of mystery. There's the story we hear, and then there's the story behind that story. Johanna's existence, or arguable lack thereof, creates a rift in the narrative. A character so vivid, so ingrained in the narrative that it's hard to reconcile the disconnect between what's been said and what's actually documented, which, to be honest, isn't much. But isn't that the nature of oral history? The stories passed down, whispered in hushed tones that grow with each retelling. Carl believed, with a fervor, in Johanna, and that conviction, that steadfastness in the face of doubt, gives us pause. It raises questions. Do we trust in the tangibility of documented evidence? Or do we put faith in the emotional truths of those who share these tales? What's more real, the documented facts, or the stories that have been breathed into life? The idea of Johanna, that spectral showgirl who might have lived, loved, and lost, captivates. It's disappointing to think she may not have been real in the traditional sense, and yet her existence, or non-existence, becomes secondary to the impact her story has had on the living. As for Janet's encounters, well, the natural human instinct is to find a source, a reason, an origin. But sometimes the quest for understanding can lead us down paths paved with bias. Jumping to conclusions, especially ones based on fragmented stories, can be misleading. But as Carl navigates this intricate maze, we hope that clarity is on the horizon. Because in tales like these, sometimes the most satisfying revelations come from unexpected corners. There's a certain cadence to skepticism, a rhythm to doubt. We've all felt it. It's that familiar dance of believing and disbelieving, being pulled in two directions. But Carl was waltzing to a different tune. Amidst the uncertainty about Johanna, there were other entities that were, apparently, verifiable. Carl's journey with the club seemed to be peppered with those you can't make this stuff up moments. The serendipity of finding not one, but two hidden secrets beneath the floorboards of the haunted club, it's the stuff of gothic novels. But right after his discovery of the supposed diary, a simple act of waking up would evolve into a narrative of eerie proportion. Living above a club that you believe to be haunted has its own set of challenges. The flicker of a light, the sudden drop in temperature, every creak becomes a question. So imagine the unease Carl felt waking up one night, gasping for air, only for darkness to engulf your surroundings moments later. And it's not just the physical act of breathing, but the weight of an unseen presence suffocating the space. Suddenly, as he regained his ability to snatch gasps of air, the power to the entirety of the building suddenly went out. A trip to the basement for many of us would be an emphatic no, but not for Carl. One would argue that this was his space, and he was determined to reclaim it. Yet as he delved deeper, another secret presented itself. An artifact from a grisly past hiding beneath yet another loose floorboard. He discovered the well. Wells are typically symbols of mystery, of depth, of secrets waiting to be uncovered. But this particular well carried the weight of the club's dark history. Immediately, as Carl stared down into its depths, he felt the sensation of being watched. The chill in the air, the overwhelming sense of foreboding. It's the culmination of every ghost story ever told, and Carl, faced with this reality, did what many of us would. He retreated. Unraveling mysteries sometimes means delving into dark corners, and for Carl, the depths of that old well pulled him into an unpredictable spiral. How often do we hear tales of places or objects that change someone, leaving imprints, shifting their behavior. If Bobby's memories were any indication, Carl's descent into this chasm of uncertainty was swift and profound. There's a poignancy to what Bobby shared. When someone you've known, someone you've relied on, starts to fragment in front of you, it's disorienting. You try to find familiar patterns, echoes of the person you once knew. But each interaction becomes a puzzle, each conversation a gamble. Which version of Carl will show up today? The reliable old friend, or the frenzied man grappling with unseen forces? Piecing together fragments of history, Carl seemed to have convinced himself about the true nature of the malevolence below. Pearl Bryan, a name etched in local legend, now seemed all too real to Carl, or more accurately, the spirit of her killers. But it's not just the clarity of history that's at stake, it's the understanding of motive. If Carl's assumptions were true, the motivations of these spirits, ones who had already taken a life before, were dark and, dare I say, sinister. There's a gravity to Carl's predicament. On the one hand, self-preservation beckons. The allure of escape, of leaving the shadows and the whispers behind, is convincing. But there's also loyalty, a commitment to those who had been his anchors. Bobby, Janet, they weren't just names or characters in this unfolding narrative. They were real people he cared for. And so the dilemma: how do you protect those you love from threats you barely understand? There's a weight to belief, an inherent gravity. For Bobby, that weight had shifted significantly. Where once he might have dismissed the strange goings-on in his club as mere coincidences or tales spun by overactive imaginations, the tangible distress of someone close, like Carl, was harder to wave away. Carl, with his unyielding conviction about the inherent malevolence of the place, embodied the emotional crux of his story. It's poignant, isn't it? To be caught between wanting to escape an unsettling environment and a sense of loyalty to those you've built connections with, especially when it's clear they're in distress. I'm reminded time and again of the tangible power of narrative. The tales we tell, the stories we come to believe, they shape our realities in ways both profound and often unsettling. So Bobby contacted a friend, Doug Hensley, who happened to be a paranormal investigator. Doug Henley's entrance into the narrative adds another layer. When someone dedicated to unearthing the arcane and the supernatural leans in, offering insights, the story gains heft. His role wasn't just to validate or to debunk, it was to provide clarity, context. Pearl Bryan's tragic fate, already steeped in dark lore, took on a heavier resonance as Doug delved deeper. He discovered more research of Pearl's killer's final words, promises that were made on the gallows, a last declaration, a vow uttered at life's final threshold, the chilling assertion that they'd come back, haunting not just a place, but the memories and legacies of those involved, is something that stays with you. But why Carl? Why was he seemingly the focal point of these vengeful spirits? Was it his closeness to Bobby, his discovery of the well, or something intangible, a connection we might never fully grasp? Doug, in his quest for clarity, turned to Patricia Michelle, and what a decision that was. Patricia, with that quintessential psychic's flair and, might I add, a name seemingly plucked from a dramatic novella, made her entrance into the story. And it's interesting, isn't it, how sometimes the most profound revelations arise when you approach a situation blind, untainted by preconceived notions or hearsay. Patricia didn't want to bear the baggage of the building's history, or of speculation. She yearned for that unfiltered connection, to hear the echoes of the past without the noise of the present. And what's so riveting here is that even in her untethered spiritual wanderings, she stumbled upon a name we'd heard before. Johanna. And here's where the lines blur once more. The tangibility of Carl's discovery of the diary, the nebulous nature of Patricia's psychic revelations, and our innate yearning to believe in tales of lost love converge in that moment. Johanna, according to Patricia, in this ethereal limbo, was waiting for a lover who might never come. It's tragically poetic. And as we grapple with this revelation, we're left to ponder. Did Johanna's father, in a fit of rage, actually end her lover's life? Or is there another twist to this already convoluted tale? There's a kind of atmospheric shift when one descends into a basement, especially one with as storied a history as this. Carl, Bobby, Doug, and Patricia, as they tread cautiously downstairs, would soon confront this club's chilling underbelly, figuratively and literally. Once in the basement, a sensation washed over Patricia, remarkably different from the ethereal tenderness of Johanna's presence. This was a raw, visceral energy. When Patricia shared her vision of the room's former life, it provided a historical lens to the narrative. It wasn't just a basement that she saw, but a relic of the old slaughterhouse. But nothing could have prepared them for Patricia's next revelation. Upon unveiling the well, she didn't just perceive darkness. She saw a terrifying floating image. Pearl's severed head floating in the water at the base of the well. A psychic's vision, or a glimpse into the club's sinister past. Patricia's visceral reaction, her description of an overwhelming spinning sensation, bears testament to the potency of what she felt. Every fiber of my being, as I narrate this, feels that gravity of truth in her words. Pearl's head might indeed have found its dark resting place in the bottom of that well. Amid the echoes of whiskey glasses and country music playing upstairs, a much deeper narrative unraveled below. One that isn't told through notes on a guitar, but through hushed voices and frenetic energies. Patricia, armed with the ethereal clarity few of us possess, played back the history she felt as she traversed the building. You see, at its heart, her revelation suggests a kind of ghostly liminality. Spirits tethered to Bobby Mackey's nightclub. Not because it's the place to be on a Saturday night, but maybe, just maybe, it's the only place they believe they can be. A refuge from eternal damnation. They might be thinking, better a bar stool than hellfire, she might have insinuated. And Johanna, well, there's a kind of tragedy to her story. A soul, perhaps too apprehensive to move on given her past deeds. Patricia then painted a rather distressing portrait of Carl's plight, suggesting that Scott and Alonzo, Pearl's murderers, saw him not as an individual, but an outlet. A channel for their pent-up malevolence. The gravity of this situation was not lost on those present, especially given her recommendation: an exorcism. And yet, amidst this whirlwind of spiritual revelations, Bobby remained Bobby, steadfast, unmoved in his belief. It's a funny thing, belief. You can be surrounded by testimonies, by evidence, and yet some people, like Bobby, stand unwavering, bound to their reality. He may not believe in ghosts, but he can sure write a tune about one. Nestled between the ebb and flow of regular patrons and country beats was a plot that strayed further from the norm than Bobby Mackey's regular clientele could ever imagine. There's a genuine concern in Bobby's voice, evident even over the phone as he spoke to Larry Kidwell. It's the kind of anxiety that doesn't surface from someone worried about his liquor stock running out, but from a friend, genuinely concerned for another friend. Larry Kidwell, more known for his expertise in media than in the realm of the supernatural, found himself in a unique position in Bobby's story. The two had been acquaintances, having crossed paths in the decidedly more mundane world of advertising.
Here's Bobby Mackey.
Y'all cowboy up.
The nightclub's jingle, far removed from the eeriness of haunted basements and malignant spirits, was what brought them together.
Gather round.
Admission's free with a rodeo ticket at Bobby Mackey's.
And the way it was is still the way it is.
A strange juxtaposition when you think about it. It's a testament to the gravity of the situation that Larry, despite his skepticism, decided to bring in Reverend Glenn Cole. See, Glenn is the sort of man who walks a tightrope between our tangible world and one less seen. He's grounded in faith, but well acquainted with the ethereal. The Reverend's reaction, though, is what paints a vivid picture of the nightclub's underlying turmoil. He didn't just walk into a club with cold drafts and eerie sounds. He walked into a place he believed was saturated with malevolence. And when a man of faith, like Reverend Cole, describes a place as the most evil he's ever encountered, it's a sentiment that carries some weight. Makes one wonder, as the door of the club swings shut behind you, and the last note of a country song fades, what unseen entities might still be lingering. There are moments that demand introspection. Carl, a sturdy figure in the midst of the undulating world of Bobby Mackey's club, found himself facing one of those moments, surrounded by the tangible rhythms of life and the less tangible hints of something otherworldly. Reverend Cole, a seasoned man of faith, looked at Carl and made a declaration that probably should have chilled more bones than it did. Carl Lawson is demonically possessed. On the night of July 20th, 1982, the curtain rose at Bobby Mackey's Music World. Bobby, the steadfast entertainer, stood up, spotlight on him, determined that, come what may, the show would indeed go on. But amidst the strumming guitars and tapping feet, a scent of smoke wafted through, cutting the cadence, halting the melodies. Then, in a moment that breaks from what one might expect from a panicking crowd, a calm evacuation ensued. The patrons, perhaps caught in the rhythm of the evening, flowed out with an ease that was, well, uncanny. But the heart of this mystery lies in the heart of the kitchen. A small fire, potentially inconspicuous but for its timing, was quelled quickly, with Carl and Bobby leading the charge. Yet as the embers cooled and the crowd trickled back in, one couldn't help but ask, was this fire merely an accident, or was it a manifestation of something darker? An omen, perhaps. Carl's suspicions certainly leaned toward the latter. The idea that spirits, disturbed by Reverend Cole's impending intervention, might have a hand in this fire wasn't beyond Carl's imagination. The looming exorcism wasn't just about repelling malicious spirits. It was about reclaiming a life, a space, a narrative. Carl stood at the precipice, hoping the next act in this unfolding drama would bring resolution, not only for him, but for all those touched by the club's haunted history. Days turned into nights. The normalcy of life returned to Bobby Mackey's club, but one day was destined to be different from the rest. The Reverend Cole was back, and with him, the heavy weight of the anticipation of the exorcism. This time, though, there was a twist. Along with the Reverend was a group of men holding cameras and notepads. Reporters. Carl's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and suspicion. In all the conversations he had, he didn't remember agreeing to this audience. It felt intrusive. Documenting, in case anything happens, the Reverend said. But what does that mean? How would you feel if, on the precipice of confronting the shadows in your life, someone said they wanted to document it, just in case? Carl hesitated, his concerns palpable, but Reverend Cole, with the calm confidence of someone who's been on this road many times before, tried to allay his fears. 18 years, he said. I've almost seen it all. But therein lies the rub, doesn't it? It's the almost that lingers in the air. So, with caution riding shotgun to hope, Carl took the lead, bringing the Reverend and his unexpected entourage to a room that had seen better days. The old kitchen. Among the remnants of renovations and scattered memories, they cleared a space. At its center, a table. Carl took a seat facing Reverend Cole, eyes searching for a sign of assurance. The room, thick with expectation, watched as Cole began his prayer, invoking a higher power to cleanse the space. But as minutes ticked by, something shifted. Carl's demeanor, previously apprehensive, seemed to morph. His hands gripped the table, his head moving rhythmically. The room's atmosphere was weighed down by the thick tension of the impending exorcism. Reverend Cole continued with his prayers, but Carl seemed to grapple with every word, his breath turning raspy. The shift in Carl's demeanor was almost immediate, coinciding with the moment Cole began quoting scriptures. It wasn't just the raspy breathing. His eyes locked onto Reverend Cole's in an unwavering stare, as if he were not seeing the Reverend, but someone or something else entirely. The room's energy shifted when Carl finally spoke, but not in his usual tone. Instead, a chilling voice emerged, whispering fears of being caught alone. Reverend Cole, however, believed this was a ruse. He felt it was the spirits manipulating and attempting to invoke sympathy. But who was really in control here? The spiritual tug-of-war lasted hours. Carl oscillated between resistance and surrender. It came to a climax with his body convulsing, a testament to the battle being waged within. And then, as suddenly as it began, Carl went still. Moments later, a different Carl emerged, saying he felt changed, hopefully for the better. Larry Kidwell, from the doorway, observed the 4 journalists leaving the scene. The look on their faces, not quite satisfaction, more letdown. Larry, like them, had expected a dramatic Hollywood-style showdown. Instead, it ended not with a roar, but a hushed resolution. The journalists might have hoped for more action, a greater climax, perhaps, but as they murmured their goodbyes, Reverend Cole pulled Larry aside. With everyone else out of earshot, he whispered a foreboding warning. This isn't over. The spirits, they lingered, intertwined with Carl's essence, either shielded by his fear or his unwillingness to let them go. It's a point of divergence in the narrative. Some say that this was it. Carl, exorcised and free, but that's not the full story that I stumbled upon. Weeks later, Reverend Cole found himself back at Bobby Mackey's, intent on completing what had only begun previously. The second exorcism took a toll that was beyond imaginable. Doug Hensley painted a vivid picture. Picture weeks of intense prayers, Carl's body writhing in a dance of pain and resistance. But one particular aftermath, after one such intense session, stands out, and trust me, it's not for the faint of heart. Alone in his room, Carl discovered his underwear drenched in what appeared to be blood. A frantic check confirmed the source. Hemorrhoids. But these weren't your typical hemorrhoids. They had appeared out of nowhere, and their severity was staggering. This wasn't just some minor affliction, according to Doug. They were abnormally large, spreading rapidly, reminiscent of an aggressive, invasive growth. Is this the spirit's handiwork? The implications were unsettling. Carl, on the verge of despair, cried out, a desperate plea to the spirits. There was this raw, palpable emotion. Stop hurting me, he begged, hoping a truce with the spirits might bring a moment's peace. And a week of tranquility followed, an eerie calm. Carl dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, his plea had been heard. But as fate, or perhaps something more sinister, would have it, Reverend Cole and Larry Kidwell made an unanticipated appearance. Carl hesitated, teetering on the edge of desperation. He contemplated evading them, but deep down he sensed that playing the spirit's game would chain him forever. Carl relented. They gathered in his kitchen, the stage set for a final showdown. As the Reverend commenced, Carl's distress was palpable. He voiced a haunting concern, mentioning Johanna and Buck, 2 spirits bound by a tragic fate. And then, Reverend Cole had a realization. A missing puzzle piece. Carl, in a twist of haunting melancholy, had grown attached to these spirits. It was a bond born of years, a connection that Carl wasn't ready to sever. The scene escalated. Carl's voice morphed, channeling entities with names like Sam Tucker and Charlie. The room was charged, each spirit vying for dominance, resisting the Reverend's calls to depart. Hours turned into an intense standoff, spirits challenging, Reverend Cole fervently praying. In a climactic moment, Carl's body, now a battlefield, rebelled against the exorcism. He pushed away, trying to escape the Reverend's incantations, but Cole, with an unwavering determination, held him close, completing his spiritual mission. And then, in a moment filled with a profound stillness, it was all over. The spirits had departed, leaving Carl exhausted yet liberated. In the quiet aftermath, Carl found himself standing in the very club that had been the epicenter of so many inexplicable events. For the first time in possibly more than 3 years, he felt a stillness, a genuine solitude. The weight of Johanna's absence, though, settled in. It was a palpable emptiness, a twinge of longing. The Reverend's words echoed in Carl's mind, a warning almost prophetic in tone. He spoke of displaced spirits and their relentless search for a dwelling. The notion of these spirits returning, but not alone, returning with 7 others, that's unnerving. This wasn't a "hey, I'm back" situation. This was more of a "I brought company" scenario. Carl would need more than just a welcome mat for that. The Reverend's emphasis on the church, on seeking refuge in faith, left Carl pondering. But there was also a sense of imposition, a feeling of being cornered. To be told that salvation lay within church walls, that was a lot for him to digest. And while Reverend Cole might have had the best intentions, demanding faith or presenting it as an ultimatum felt restrictive. The idea of being haunted for eternity, it's chilling. To seek solace in a sacred place, that's personal. But when it's presented as the only way out, it complicates matters. The Reverend's work was done, but Carl's journey, well, that was just beginning. In the bustling, neon-lit haze of the late 70s and 80s, Bobby Mackey had one primary objective: maintaining the reputation of his establishment, particularly with whisperings of hauntings threatening its very foundation. By the 90s, it seemed as though those very rumors had taken a life of their own. One could argue that an exorcism in a nightclub is, well, hard to imagine, and let's face it, ghosts can overshadow a guitar solo any day. 1993. A pivotal moment for Bobby Mackey's music world. It faced a lawsuit from a patron. J.R. Costigan didn't just make headlines, he embodied the curious intersection of the supernatural and the legal system. This wasn't just another disgruntled patron. This was a man alleging an assault by a ghostly figure. And not just any ghost, but a dark-haired specter with a noose around its neck. Costigan's demand? $1,000 for emotional damage, and a spectral danger sign to boot. Now let's pause for a moment. Imagine walking into an establishment and spotting a sign that reads, "Warning, potential ghostly encounters." It's oddly fascinating, isn't it? But the legal response? That's where the tale took an even quirkier turn. W. Robert Lotz, Bobby's attorney, channeled his inner bard in what can only be described as an unconventional move. Lotz submitted a motion to dismiss. Not in legalese, but in rhyme. The plaintiff claims in his petition he was assaulted by an apparition, injured by a ghostly nemesis, on Bobby Mackey's premises, where beard and brazen he did blunder, by taunting their supernatural wonder, proclaiming loudly his resistance to belief in spiritual existence. Alas, this essence disembodied followed the plaintiff to the men's potty, where a dark-haired haunt with neck and noose soundly kicked the complainant's drunk caboose. This is real, folks. This really fucking happened. One can't help but picture this court document punctuated with verses about haunted bathrooms and drunk cabooses. And yet, despite its whimsical tone, Lotz's assertion was clear. He was giving this case the attention it demanded. It's not every day you defend against allegations involving the supernatural. But as the legal proceedings drudged on, a startling twist. Costigan was a no-show at the hearing, and the case was dismissed. Perhaps cold feet? Or was it the weight of confronting the ethereal in a court of law? One thing is certain. In the annals of peculiar lawsuits, this one certainly earned its place. In the dimly lit backdrop of Bobby Mackey's club, a new sign indeed appeared. It wasn't advertising the next big act or flashing the drink special of the night. Instead, it bore a curious message. Warning to our patrons, this establishment is purported to be haunted. It's not every day you see a disclaimer like that at a bar. For Bobby, the sign wasn't just a tongue-in-cheek nod to the local folklore. It was a marker of his own evolution. For years, Bobby had been a vocal skeptic. Whispers of spirits and ghostly apparitions were dismissed with a wave of his hand. But a lawsuit over purported ghost attack, that was harder to ignore. And so, instead of running from the rumors, Bobby embraced them. By the late 90s, there was a noticeable shift in the narrative. Gone were the adamant denials. In their place, a subtle acceptance of the supernatural claims. The club, once just a hotspot for its music, was now gaining a reputation for something far more mysterious. Television shows and various podcasts jumped on the story, turning Bobby Mackey's music world into a veritable hotspot for paranormal enthusiasts. Visitors today don't just come for drinks or Bobby's band's electrifying sets. They come, in part, seeking the supernatural. And while Fridays and Saturdays might still hum with the twang of country tunes, the rest of the week is reserved for the eerily unconventional. Haunted tours, paranormal investigations, and even haunted sleepovers. Yet amidst all this spectral excitement, two figures from the past still stand out: Carl and Janet. Carl, having since moved on from the club, never hesitates to recount his ethereal experiences. Janet, once the steadfast manager and wife, unfortunately passed away in 2009 from a prolonged illness. And Bobby? Well, he remains the ever-skeptical proprietor. Despite the ghost tours and haunted tales, he's yet to experience anything paranormal himself. Whether he truly believes or just finds it easier to ride the wave of public intrigue, one thing is for sure. Bobby Mackey's club, with its mix of history, music, and mystery, will remain legendary. As the sun sets on our journey through Bobby Mackey's music world, one thing becomes abundantly clear. Places, like people, have memories. In a world where everything is increasingly transient and digital, physical spaces like Bobby Mackey's stand as stalwarts of time, brimming with stories that bridge the gap between the living and the perhaps not so gone. This establishment isn't just a building made of brick and mortar. Within its walls pulse the beats of countless stories, intertwining past and present, reality and the ethereal. It's more than just a bar or a club. It's a microcosm of our collective human experience. Every creak of its floorboards, every note played on its stage, every patron who's felt an unexpected chill down their spine, they're all testaments to the complex tapestry of life, death, and everything in between. In our show, When Walls Can Talk, we don't just seek to unveil ghost stories or urban legends. Instead, we plunge deep into the very fabric of places like Bobby Mackey's, searching for the threads that bind us, reminding us that our stories, be they filled with joy, sorrow, love, or fear, leave imprints long after we're gone. So why should we care about Bobby Mackey's music world? Because it serves as a poignant reminder that our stories, our legacies, aren't merely confined to the digital realms of social media or written records. They're etched into the very walls around us, waiting for those willing to listen. As William James once remarked, the world of reality has its limits. The world of imagination is boundless. Perhaps, maybe, places like Bobby Mackey's exist on the fragile cusp between these two realms. So the next time you find yourself in an old building or a historic landmark, take a moment to pause, to listen. For if you're still enough, you might just hear the murmurs of ages past, reminding you of the boundless world beyond our immediate understanding. And that's it for today's chapter of When Walls Can Talk, the podcast, where paranormal mysteries and dark histories collide. As we pull back the curtain on these incredible stories week after week, I'm constantly struck by the layers and nuances that every space, every corner of our world holds. The magic of these narratives is brought to life not just by the tales themselves, but also by the evocative soundscapes accompanying them. Our heartfelt thanks goes to artlist.io for their incredible music. If you find yourself swept up in the ambience of our show, there's a link in our show notes where you can explore Artlist.io for yourself. And hey, if you decide to take the leap into their vast musical realm with a paid membership, you'll receive 2 months absolutely free. And speaking of taking a leap, if this podcast has resonated with you, if you felt a connection to the stories, to the places, and to the histories we've unearthed, I'd love for you to leave a review. Starting with our next episode, I'll be highlighting some of these reviews at the beginning of each installment. Your words and feedback mean the world to us. Well, to me, Jeremy Hegg, the singular force behind this podcast. Your support, your encouragement, they fuel the passion and dedication that goes into creating each episode, so please, share your thoughts. Let others know about When Walls Can Talk, and together, we'll continue to uncover the hidden tales that lie just beneath the surface. Until next time, remember, every wall has a story, if only we choose to listen.